About a year and a half, 2 years ago, I was invited to Boston College. I'm an academic philosopher, apart from being a monk, and so I get these kinds of invitations once in a while to speak at universities. So a professor invited me to guest teach in her graduate seminar on comparative religion at Boston College. She's a very renowned professor. I had a good time speaking to her grad students. It was fine. She then invited me on that same day in the afternoon to come to her Introduction to Hinduism class. And it was just the beginning of the semester. So this is the first class in Intro to Hinduism. And she invited me just to sit in, not to speak, but just to sit in. And I was curious. Let me see how she teaches Hinduism, especially on the first day. And so I'm sitting there. She's got a PowerPoint, slide 1. And she starts by saying, Hinduism is based on the caste system. First words out of her mouth. And it was very disturbing to me. And of course I had to interject. And I mentioned, first of all, the caste system, there are different ways of thinking about it. And the current caste system, the hereditary one, is not the original caste system. And we got into it. Her teaching assistant, so she herself she's a brilliant woman, a Catholic theologian, and so she's not disinterested. And the teaching assistant was doing his PhD on this topic and spent time in India trying to convert the Dalits, the outcast Hindus, to Christianity. So they both had sort of vested interest in a certain way. But it's very disturbing to me that this is the way that Hinduism is being taught to the next generation, not only of Hindu students, but just of people in general. This is the way that most people think about Hinduism. And I wish I could say that that's just a one-off, that it's an anomaly, but it's just not the case. There's a pervasive bias throughout universities, schools, high school, against Hinduism. The way that they portray Hinduism is as this kind of superstitious faith. It's polytheistic in a way that's crude. They believe in all sorts of weird things like monkey gods and this and that. Mainstream media, not favorable to Hinduism. Just read the New York Times or BBC, and they always highlight the negatives. And there's no clear sense of what Hinduism really is. In terms of academics, there's it's a kind of academic fashion now to criticize Hinduism. And the way they tend to do it is to equate Hinduism with right-wing Hindu nationalism, what's called Hindutva. And it's very pervasive and very dangerous. And for instance, about a decade ago, there's an Indian intellectual named Jyotirmaya Sharma, a professor, I think now at the University of Hyderabad. He wrote an entire book attacking Swami Vivekananda. The book is called Cosmic Love and Human Apathy. And he argues, the main thesis of the book is that Swami Vivekananda was the father of Hindu nationalism. These trends are very disturbing. I wrote an entire article critiquing his book. If you're interested, you could look at it. It's called Was Swami Vivekananda a Hindu Supremacist? Revisiting a long-standing debate. And I argue, of course, that he wasn't. But unfortunately, a lot of people think he was, and it's part of the problem. Closer to home, I'm a Hindu chaplain at 2 universities here, USC and UCLA, and I talk to students a lot, and usually most of them are Hindu students, and they tell me privately, with the look of kind of consternation in their faces, they say, Maharaj, we're embarrassed to call ourselves Hindu. They don't even want to call themselves Hindu anymore, because Hinduism has become a kind of bad word. So it's very disturbing. And in terms of Vedanta, a lot of people who are attracted to Vedanta, even among them, some of them say, proudly, I'm a Vedantin, I'm not Hindu. I've heard this a lot. This is also very troubling to me. So this whole talk, it's not meant to be political. I'm not wading into politics in any way. Swami Vivekananda was very emphatic that monks of this order should be strictly politically neutral, not getting this right-wing, left-wing, or anything. It has nothing to do with politics. It's about Hindu philosophy, What exactly is Hinduism as a philosophy, as a spiritual philosophy? And what exactly is Vedanta as a philosophy? And what is the relationship between Hinduism and Vedanta? None of this has anything to do with politics. The problem is that Hinduism as a religion has been equated with certain Hindu political movements, and I think that's part of the problem. This actually reminds me of, I gave a talk here about 1.5 years ago or something called Spiritual But Not Religious, ? Some of you probably attended that talk. And the main argument in that talk was it's wrong to think of ourselves as spiritual but not religious, or at least it's not the most fruitful way of thinking about things, that we can and should be spiritual and also religious. Likewise, instead of calling ourselves Vedantins but not Hindus, my argument's going to be, I'll make the case in the course of this talk that we should be Vedantins and therefore proud, liberal, universal Hindus. The structure of the talk is going to be as follows. In order to answer the question, is Vedanta Hindu, we need to have a good understanding of what Hinduism is. So, first part of the talk, I'm going to answer the question briefly, what is Hinduism? Then I'll ask the question, what is Vedanta? And try to answer that question. And then, once we answer those two questions, what is Hinduism and what is Vedanta, then I can pretty quickly actually answer the question, is Vedanta Hindu? But finally, just so that I don't leave you up in the clouds in the realm of abstraction, I raise a very important question for all of us. Why should any of this matter to us as spiritual aspirants? How do we apply the insights that I'm going to share with you to our day-to-day spiritual practice? Okay, so that's the plan for the talk. So let's start with this first fundamental question. What exactly is Hinduism? Again, I'll wax a little bit autobiographical here. I was born and raised in Boston in a Hindu family. And what that amounted to, more or less, was that I noticed that my mother would do puja, ritualistic worship, twice a day, without fail, at exactly the same time every day. She never breathed a word about it to me. She never tried to get me involved, but she would do it, which I respected. My dad didn't do much of anything, but still, both the whole family, they can call themselves Hindu. And as for me, growing up, what I understood Hinduism to mean was they would take me to a puja about 3 or 4 times a year. There were these big ritualistic worships on certain religious days, like Saraswati Puja, where we worship Mother Saraswati, Divine Mother Saraswati. They would tell me to bring Indian parents. They tend to be very academically focused and arguably obsessive. And so they would tell me to bring my textbooks that I can offer at the feet of this Mother Saraswati, this idol. I saw it as a sculpture. And so I'd put them there. And then I'd sit for maybe like 2 or 3 minutes and get bored because nobody's explaining to me what the heck is going on. And it felt very superstitious. Like, why are we going to God to get better grades? Like, it turned me off. And so I would play football outside with my friends. That was fun. I'd go in for the lunch, which was also kind of nice. It's called khichdi. You get this nice little food. But that was Hinduism to me. It was not inspiring, nothing spiritual about it. My parents didn't bother to explain what Hinduism was about. Nobody did. And it left me kind of frustrated and kind of disenchanted with the religion I was born into. And I was a kind of budding philosopher, and so I didn't even like the idea of being born into a religion. That just seemed irrational to me. Just because my parents happened to be a particular religion doesn't mean that I should accept that religion. Why should I? So then, right when I got into college, actually before that, probably in high school, I started exploring different world religions. I started reading the Bible, parts of the Quran, the Buddhist scripture, Dhammapada, Bhagavad Gita. And then I discovered, when I read the Gita for the first time in translation, I didn't know Sanskrit at the time, then my eyes started to open. I was like, wait, this is Hinduism. This is the religion that I was born into. And I started feeling, wow, there's something to this. This is a spiritual religion through and through. But I had to kind of reverse engineer Hinduism for myself, unfortunately, which is not ideal. And then later, as I got deeper into the study of Hinduism and Vedanta, and I discovered our particular tradition, I read certain texts that really helped crystallize in my own mind what Hinduism really is. And I want to share with you what I've come up with. Swami Medhananda, in one of his first speeches at the World's Parliament of Religions, he delivered what's called now, very famously, Paper on Hinduism. It's a beautiful essay, and I recommend that you look at that. Later in his life, he wrote in Bengali originally, and then it's been translated, an essay called Hindu Dharma Ki. What is Hindu Dharma? What is Hindu religion? That's also very powerful and very illuminating. And a much less well-known piece is by Sri Aurobindo, who was influenced by Ramakrishna and Vivekananda. In his book, A Defense of Indian Culture, there's a brief, about 3 to 4 pages, where he raises this question, what is Hinduism? And he gives a really succinct and beautiful answer. So I'll be drawing on all of these texts and also my own personal experiences as growing up Hindu and then having to, as I said, to reverse engineer Hinduism for myself. This is kind of, you can take it this way for all you Hindu parents out there, that this is the way that I wish Hinduism was taught to me when I was growing up. But I hope this is not, I don't want you to think that if you're not Hindu, that's not relevant. No, it applies to anybody who finds anything of value in Vedanta. Because if you're a Vedantan, you should understand what Hinduism is and what the relationship is between Vedanta and Hinduism. One thing that, I keep picking on my parents, not just my parents, but Hindu parents everywhere. In India too. It's a problem everywhere, including India. But I'm sympathetic too, because Hinduism is a vast religion, and it encompasses a huge range of spiritual traditions which seem to have almost nothing in common. And so it really is difficult to come up with the common denominator across these different Hindu traditions and sects. It takes some thinking, it takes some reflection, some serious study. So this is my understanding, and you can come up with your own, but this to me is, as I said, the way that I wish Hinduism was taught to me when I was growing up. I suggest that Hinduism has 4 core doctrines. And all of these doctrines you'll find in the Vedas and the Bhagavad Gita, which are the core Hindu scriptures. First doctrine, there is one infinite divine reality which is called by various names and which manifests in various forms. There's one infinite divine reality which goes by various names. You can call it Allah or Christ or Krishna or anything you want, Kali. And there isn't just one form of God. There are many. It can take many forms. God is also formless. So God is formless, both with and without form, assumes many different forms, and God is both personal and impersonal. There's a common misconception about Hinduism that is polytheistic. I think this is a fundamental mistake. The Rig Veda, the most ancient Hindu scripture from the Vedas, the Rig Veda. There's a great statement which Swami Medhananda loved quoting. Ekam sad vipra bahudha vadanti. The truth is one, but sages call it by various names. This is the first doctrine of Hinduism. It's not polytheistic. There's one infinite divine reality which different people worship in different ways, perceive in different ways, experience in different ways, and call by different names. But it's only one, which means it's monotheistic, and depending on which tradition of Hinduism you subscribe to, it could also be monistic. But Hinduism is definitely not polytheistic, it's monotheistic. And it's based on this doctrine that you get one of Hinduism's most wonderful doctrines, which makes it one of the broadest and most universal religions in the world. It's called the doctrine of Ishta Devata. Your preferred form of worshipping God or the divine. Ishta Devata. In a typical Hindu household, like my own, my mother, in her own shrine, she had a picture of Kali, she had a picture of Krishna, I think possibly even Ramakrishna was in there, and there are a few, even though I wasn't actually born in this tradition, I came to it later, and then they came to it after me. But it's a diverse shrine, and it's quite typical actually. You'll find that Hindus have no problem worshiping God in many different forms. And it's also the case that you find in many Hindu households that the father might be a worshiper of Shiva, mother might be a worshiper of Krishna, a kid might be an Advaita Vedantan, and they're all good Hindus. And it's because of this doctrine of Ishta Devata, which means that all Hindus know that even though one is a worshiper of Krishna or one is Kali and Shiva, they're all worshiping the same divine. just by different names and in different forms. Okay? So that's the first doctrine. It's absolutely crucial. Second, where does that leave us? How are we related to this infinite divine reality? Each one of us is intimately connected to this infinite divine. Notice the language I'm using here. Intimately connected to. I'm using vague language on purpose. It's because different traditions within Hinduism explain that intimate connection in different ways. Advaita Vedanta, the non-dual school within Hinduism, says that we are identical with the infinite divine as non-dual pure consciousness. But not all Hindus agree. There are many Hindus who don't accept that, especially bhakti traditions, devotional traditions of Hinduism. Say, no, we don't want to become sugar, we want to eat sugar. How do you eat sugar? You have to be different from the sugar. But there's still an intimate connection. Even bhaktas say that there's an intimate connection between the eternal soul and the divine. The crucial thing that every single Hindu believes is that we are not this physical body. We are not even our minds. We are eternal souls, non-physical souls, separate from the body-mind complex. And as eternal souls, we are intimately connected to the divine. The Shvetashvatara Upanishad says it very beautifully. We are all children of immortal bliss. Amritasya putraha. Swami Medhananda used to say when he came here to lecture, he would say, it is a standing libel upon human nature to call a human being a sinner. We are divinities walking here on earth. Our nature is fundamentally divine. We are intimately connected with the divine. He also adds, in a much less well-known conversation that he had with one of his disciples, his name was Swami Shuddhananda. Shuddhananda was carrying a copy of the Brahma Sutra with him, which is one of the important Vedantic scriptures. And Swami Vivekananda asked him, what are you reading? He said, I'm reading the Brahma Sutra with Shankara's commentary. And Swami Vivekananda scolded him and said, who told you to read Shankara's commentary? Shankara was an Advaitin, and so he's going to be interpreting all these sutras from the standpoint of Advaita. I want you to try to understand the original intent of the author of the Brahma Sutras themselves. It's a very interesting passage. If you're interested, it's found in a book called Shamiji Podaprante, originally in Bengali, by the author Swami Abjajananda, which is basically reminiscences of Swami Vivekananda written by his own monastic disciples. I think it's been translated as monastic disciples of Swami Vivekananda, something like that. Anyway, they have this really interesting conversation where Swami Vivekananda says, take this one particular sutra, 1.1.19. Asmin nasya cha tad yogam shasti. The Upanishads, the scriptures, teach what? The yogam, the union of the eternal soul, the jiva, and the infinite divine, Brahman. And Swami Vivekananda says, notice the broadness of this language. The Upanishads, Vedanta teaches the union of the eternal soul with the infinite divine. And that union, he says, can be interpreted from the Advaitic standpoint as absolute identity, in the way that Shankara does, but it need not be. It's meant to be broad. So you can also understand it as, O Lord, I am your servant, you are the master. O Lord, you are the whole, I am a part, I am a portion. These are all equally valid within Vedanta. Each of those, however, is based on the belief in an intimate connection between the eternal soul and the eternal infinite divine. Okay, so that's the second core doctrine of Hinduism. In some way, we are intimately connected with the divine. We are not the body-mind complex. We are eternal souls, blissful, divine, and free. Third core doctrine of Hinduism. What's the goal of life? Big question. What's the meaning of life? The goal of life is to attain liberation from suffering and limitless fulfillment. How do we achieve that goal? Through the direct experiential knowledge of the infinite divine truth, the infinite divine reality, and our relationship with that divine reality. That's the goal of life. That explains the meaning of life, according to Hinduism. Sri Ramakrishna used to say, Ishwar labh manush jibaner uddesha, which means the goal of life is to realize the divine or the self, the higher self within. Fourth key doctrine of Hinduism. There are many different paths to this goal. There are many different paths to this goal, and there are infinite paths, in fact, but we can generalize those paths into four main, you can call them the four royal highways to realizing our true divine nature. Karma Yoga, which is the path of selfless action. If you engage in action and work, but you try to take the ego and selfishness out of the work, that becomes Karma Yoga, and you do it as an offering to the divine. That's Karma Yoga. Bhakti Yoga, the path of devotion, prayer, worship, any kind of ritualistic puja, those kinds of things. That all falls under Bhakti Yoga, the yoga of devotion toward a personal God. Jnana Yoga, the path of knowledge. This is the path of followers of Shankara. This is the path of Advaita Vedanta, where you keep telling yourself, I am non-dual pure consciousness. I'm not the body. I'm not the mind. And you reflect on that teaching, and you try to internalize that teaching through meditation and practice. And fourth and finally, Raja Yoga, the path of meditation. This is based primarily on Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. Some of you are probably familiar with that. And again, what it teaches is through meditation, we can realize our true natures as eternal Purushas, as an eternal soul separate from the body-mind complex. So in any case, fourth doctrine is there isn't just one way to realize the goal. There are many, many different ways of attaining the goal of liberation from all suffering and realization of our true divine nature. That's Hinduism in a nutshell, these four doctrines, and how I wish that somebody had told me that when I was growing up. I wanted to mention, actually, this is quite interesting to me. Swami Medhananda, in a letter to Mrs. G.W. Hale, dated July 1st, 1894, so just within months of his coming to the U.S. When he first came to the U.S., he didn't teach Vedanta right off the bat. That came a little bit later. What he was doing was correcting misconceptions about Hinduism. People actually thought at the time that Hindu mothers would throw their babies to the crocodiles and really weird things. So he said, no, that's not what Hinduism is about. But he didn't talk about Vedanta. And then in this letter, he says something really interesting. He says, here I find a quotation from a speech by Sir Monier Williams, a professor of Sanskrit at the Oxford University. It is very strange as coming from one who every day expects to see the whole of India converted to Christianity. Okay, so the context is there's this brilliant scholar named Monier Williams, who's a Christian scholar at Oxford. Some of you might know his name if you know Sanskrit, because he made a famous Sanskrit-English dictionary, which is still used. It's a good dictionary. Anyway, but he was also a Christian missionary, and he set out to convert heathen Hindus to Christianity. And so Swamiji was very struck by this statement made by Monier Williams. This is the statement that he's quoting in this letter. Monier Williams says, and yet it is a remarkable characteristic of Hinduism that it neither requires nor attempts to make converts. Nor is it at present by any means decreasing in numbers, nor is it being driven out of the field by two such proselytizing religions as Mohammedanism and Christianity. On the contrary, it is at present rapidly increasing. And far more remarkable than this is that it is all receptive, all embracing, and all comprehensive. It claims to be the one religion of humanity, of human nature, of the entire world. It cares not to oppose the progress of Christianity nor of any other religion, for it has no difficulty in including all other religions within its all-embracing arms and ever-widening fold. And in real fact, Hinduism has something to offer which is suited to all minds. Its very strength lies in its infinite adaptability to the infinite diversity of human characters and human tendencies. It has its highly spiritual and abstract side suited to the philosophical higher classes. Notice the correspondence is here. This if any of you just listen to what I said about the four yogas, this corresponds to Jnana Yoga. Its practical and concrete side suited to the man of affairs and the man of the world corresponds to Karma Yoga, the yoga of selfless action. Its aesthetic and ceremonial side, suited to the man of poetic feeling and imagination, corresponds to Bhakti Yoga, the yoga of feeling and devotion. Its quiescent and contemplative side, suited to the man of peace and lover of seclusion, Raja Yoga, the yoga of meditation. And strikingly, it's only, as far as I can tell, based on my research, when I did a chronological study of Swami Medhananda, he didn't start teaching Hinduism and Vedanta on the basis of the four yogas until after this letter. So it's entirely possible, it would be an extraordinary irony, if Swami Vivekananda, one of the great preachers of Hinduism and Vedanta, was inspired to teach Vedanta and Hinduism on the basis of the 4 yogas by a Christian missionary. It'd be very funny. But it could very well be the case. And Swamiji says, after quoting this from Monier Williams, he says, this, as coming from one of the staunchest defenders of Christianity, is wonderful indeed. But he seems to have got the idea quite correct. This is extraordinary, just as a kind of historical fact, and it's worth looking into. Even this staunch Christian missionary who's dead set on converting heathen Hindus to Christianity recognizes the greatness of Hinduism. It reads like an advertisement for Hinduism. And he was getting reports from Christian missionaries who were going to India. This is in the late 19th century. And they come back frustrated. Why? Because they approach a Hindu, they say, you should accept our Christ. And Hindus will say, yes, of course we accept your Christ. We love Christ. Christ is God himself. And then they get, well, so then you should be Christian. They're like, no, we're staying Hindu. Because God is not only Christ. God is also Krishna. God is also our beloved Rama. But we love you too. It's very frustrating for people who are trying to convert us. Sri Ramakrishna. You find this in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, March 9th, 1884. Sri Ramakrishna talks about Hinduism in a similar way. He says, the Sanatana Dharma, this is the term that's often used for Hinduism. If you don't like the term Hinduism, call it Sanatana Dharma. But I don't see a problem with Hinduism. It means literally eternal dharma, the eternal religion. The Sanatana Dharma, the religion of the rishis, the sages, the ancient sages, has been in existence from time out of mind and will exist eternally. There exist in this Sanatana Dharma all forms of worship of God with form and worship of the impersonal deity as well. It contains all paths, the path of knowledge, the path of devotion, and so on. Other forms of religion, the modern cults, will remain for a few days and then disappear. But see how vast and how broad and universal Sri Ramakrishna's understanding of Hinduism is. And in a single sentence, he captures this really well. He says, Tini ananto patho ananto. The divine is infinite, and the paths to the divine are equally infinite. That's it. That's Hinduism in one sentence. But let me add a little complexity here. So, if somebody asks you what is Hinduism, I suggest that you give them these 4 core doctrines. But you might be wondering, well, there are other doctrines too, aren't there? I'll suggest that there's also what we can call Hinduism plus. Expanded Hinduism. It's these 4 core doctrines plus 2 more doctrines, which you also find very frequently in the Hindu scriptures. So here's doctrines 5 and 6. And why am I saying Hinduism plus? Because even if you don't accept 5 and 6, you still count as a good Hindu. Okay? But most Hindus do also accept 5 and 6. What are these 5 and 6? Now you must be wondering. Okay, 5. The doctrines of karma and rebirth. I gave a whole talk here a while ago called Born Again and Again, all about these doctrines of karma and rebirth. Yes, you'll find them in the Gita, you'll find them in the Upanishads, all the Vedantic scriptures and other Hindu scriptures. Karma and rebirth. What is the doctrine of karma? We reap what we sow. Very fundamentally, very basically. The details, I actually just wrote a book called Karma and Rebirth in Hinduism. It'll be coming out with Cambridge University Press later this year. I don't know when exactly. It's under peer review. So that's the doctrine of karma. And the doctrine of rebirth. This is not our only life. We've lived before. If our souls are eternal, that's the doctrine number 2, right? Then what in the world were we doing before we came here and were born as a baby in this life? We had to have been somewhere. We existed before in previous bodies. That's the idea. In other lokas even at some points. Loka means a different realm. This is not the only realm, this earth. And this is also really important. Why do I say that it's not mandatory for Hindus to accept these doctrines, even though most do? This comes from none other than Sri Ramakrishna himself. The author of the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, he was very rational, he was very sophisticated and cultured and had multiple master's degrees. And so he couldn't really stomach the doctrines of karma and rebirth when he first came to Sri Ramakrishna. And he felt a little guilty about it because Sri Ramakrishna is constantly talking about karma and rebirth. And he's wondering, am I falling short here? So one day, July 21st, 1883, M asks Sri Ramakrishna, I haven't much faith in rebirth and inherited tendencies from previous births. Will that in any way injure my devotion to God? Sri Ramakrishna, it is enough to believe that all is possible in God's creation. Never allow the thought to cross your mind that your ideas are the only true ones and that those of others are false. Then God will explain everything. Many different ways to answer this question. A more conservative Hindu, when asked by somebody, do I really need to believe in karma and rebirth? They say, yeah, you're not really a Hindu unless you believe in karma and rebirth. That's not how Sri Ramakrishna answered the question. Don't worry. You don't need to believe in it. But just be open-minded. Don't be dogmatic and fanatical about your beliefs. Just because those doctrines don't appeal to you doesn't mean that they're false. And don't start judging other people for believing those doctrines. That's the right attitude. And lo and behold, what happened? M came around. M meaning Mohanlal Gupta, the author of this book, The Gospel. He came around and he accepted everything. The whole kit and caboodle of Hinduism, including karma and rebirth. But what I find these days is that many Hindus who call themselves Hindu, some of them don't feel comfortable with these doctrines for different reasons. Maybe because they're exposed to Western ideas, or they don't find them rational or whatever. What I would suggest is exactly what Sri Ramakrishna suggested, which is that be open-minded. You don't need to believe it, and it doesn't mean you're not a Hindu if you don't believe these doctrines, but be open-minded. Read Medhananda's book, the one that's coming out later this year, a little plug for my book. Because even most Hindus don't think about what are the best arguments in favor of karma and rebirth, what are the arguments against karma and rebirth. Do Hindus have good responses to these objections to karma and rebirth? I discuss all those things in this book. And so I suggest that any Hindu who has any interest in these doctrines of karma and rebirth, read the book and think for yourselves about whether you find them rational. But really, even intuitively, it's pretty rational to accept these doctrines, at least from a certain standpoint. For instance, look at the widely varying circumstances into which we're born. Some are born into abject poverty, with a broken family and this and all sorts of difficulties. Another one's born with a silver spoon in their mouth. How do you explain them? Is God, and if there's a God, then is God just arbitrary and playing favorites? Why? Well, it's because of what we did in previous lives. Karma explains that really beautifully. The problem of evil and suffering. Why do some people suffer all their lives, other people living hunky-dory lives? Well, we reap what we sow, the doctrine of karma. And spiritual life. Think about it this way. Is it really plausible to think that in one lifetime we can become saints? Is it that easy? Or is it more plausible to believe that spiritual life is a journey across many lifetimes, spanning many lifetimes? And we make some progress in this life. It's like a bank account. We make $50,000. We come back again in our next life. We have that balance to begin with, and then we make another $50,000. We get $100,000. So it's kind of like that. I think that's a useful analogy. No effort is lost, but it takes many lifetimes to achieve the highest spiritual goal. And also, if you think about these doctrines of karma and rebirth deeply, you find that they move in the direction of what's called universal liberation, which means instead of believing that there are some poor souls who are condemned to an eternal hell, like some religions do, the Hindu doctrine of karma and rebirth means you'll get as many chances as it takes, as you need to get it right, to reach the final goal, which means nobody will be left out in the end. It's a very hopeful and optimistic doctrine, actually, if you think about it. No eternal hell. It's a wonderful thing. Now, so that's the fifth doctrine. So that's Hinduism plus, as I said. Sixth doctrine. So this is the second doctrine of Hinduism plus. So 1 through 4 is Hinduism proper. And then 5 is karma and rebirth. And 6 is, can you guess? Can anyone guess? The caste system. Some of you, yeah, okay, good. You guessed it. Don't roll your eyes just yet. The caste system, you do find it in many Hindu scriptures. Varna, the term varna is used in the Bhagavad Gita. You find it a lot. Krishna says, Chatur varnyam maya srishtam guna karma vibhagashaha, which means I created this caste system based on guna and karma. Guna and karma. Keep this in mind. This is very important. What does guna mean? Your innate tendencies and qualities. What is karma? Your behavior. What do you do? How do you act? Notice that the definition of the caste system in the Gita, which is the most important text within Hinduism, scripture of Hinduism, it's not defined in terms of heredity. You're not Brahmin because you were born to Brahmin parents. You're not a Vaishya because you were born to Vaishya parents. Your caste is determined based on your innate qualities and your behavior. If you behave like a Brahmin, you're a Brahmin. If you behave like an outcast, you're an outcast. That's the idea. That's the original caste system. This is something that Swami Vivekananda emphasized again and again. And you'll find it. So you find it in the Gita, Mahabharata, our great epic, says not birth, not initiation, not knowledge of the Vedas, not even lineage cause a person to be twice born, meaning belonging to one of the three upper castes. The only cause is behavior. Very much along the lines of this Gita idea of the caste system. Another verse from the Mahabharata, truth, generosity, patience, good conduct, harmlessness, austerity, compassion, where these are found, that person is said to be a Brahmin. Okay? This is the caste system, the sixth doctrine of Hinduism plus. And what's the logic behind this? It's very intuitive, and this is something that's talked about a lot in positive psychology now. Martin Seligman talks about it. He talks about leading the good life, and he says the good life consists in two things. Number one, identify your signature strengths. Number two, find a calling or a vocation that allows you to cultivate those signature strengths on a regular basis. This is exactly the Gita's teaching on the caste system. Identify your caste based on your guna and karma. What makes me tick? What are my innate qualities? What's my behavior in this world? Based on that, find your swadharma. Identify your swadharma, your own law of being. Find a line of work that helps you to cultivate your qualities, your innate qualities on a regular basis. If you do that, you make maximal spiritual progress because you're really like maximizing the use of the energies, the packets of energy that comprise your human personality. And secondly, you're maximally benefiting society. Just think about it from a social standpoint. A well-functioning society is one in which somebody who leans toward medicine and who has strong abilities to serve others in that capacity can become a doctor. And that another person in that same society who loves arguing and debating and is kind of would love to be a lawyer, that society will allow that person to become a lawyer, the best lawyer he or she can be. It just stands to reason. Another person has a deep impulse to serve. Then that person should be able to engage in the service industry and to find a career in the service industry of some sort. That's the original caste system. So that's the sixth doctrine of Hinduism plus. Even if you don't subscribe to karma and rebirth, even if you think that, even after you explain that, Medhananda, I don't accept the caste system, fine, it doesn't matter. You're a Hindu if you accept 1 through 4. That's it. And then a lot of Hindus also accept karma and rebirth, so Hinduism plus. The doctrines of karma and rebirth, and also not the hereditary caste system, but the caste system based on our innate qualities and our behavior. All right? Now, that's part one, which is what is Hinduism. Now, part two, what is Vedanta? I gave a talk here a while ago called Vedanta for Dummies. And so you can watch that talk for details here. But the word Vedanta is actually very broad, and it can be defined in broader and narrower ways. The narrowest way of defining Vedanta is Veda, going back to its etymology. Veda plus Anta. Anta means end or culmination, and Veda means the Vedas. So Vedanta literally means the end or culmination of the Vedas, which are what? The Upanishads themselves. The Upanishads are the scriptures found within the Vedas, which teach the highest spiritual knowledge. That's Vedanta in the narrowest sense. In a slightly broader sense, it encompasses, Vedanta means not just the Upanishads, but what's called the Prasthana-traya, the three scriptural pillars of Vedanta. Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita, and Brahma Sutra, these three scriptures. But secondly, there's a second definition of Hinduism, of Vedanta, sorry, not Hinduism. Vedanta is one of the many philosophical traditions within Hinduism. There are different schools of Hindu philosophy: Sankhya, Yoga, Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Purvamimamsa, and Vedanta. It's one of the 6 orthodox schools of Hindu philosophy. Okay? And that school of Vedanta, that philosophical school of Vedanta, has many sub-schools. And I go into the details in that talk, Vedanta for Dummies. Some of you probably attended that talk. So I'm not going to go into the details here. But that's another way to think about Vedanta. And if you're an Advaita Vedantin, you can say I'm a Vedantin, but I'm an Advaita Vedantin. You can be a follower of Ramanuja and say I'm a Vedantin, but I'm a follower of qualified non-dualism, and so on and so forth. I belong to one of these philosophical schools of Vedanta. That's the idea. Third, this is the broadest possible definition of Vedanta. And note that these 3 conceptions of Vedanta are not mutually exclusive. You can accept them all at the same time. In the broadest possible sense, Vedanta is what I would call a meta-religion. Not in Mark Zuckerberg's sense. Meta-religion, M-E-T-A, religion. It's a kind of fundamental philosophy that serves as the basis of all the world religions. In that sense, I'm calling Vedanta a meta-religion or a kind of universal religion. So Vedanta in this broad sense is not one religion among others. It's the philosophical foundation of all religions. It's the spiritual and philosophical basis of all religions. In an interview on October 23rd, 1895, Swami Medhananda said, "I propound a philosophy which can serve as a basis to every possible religious system in the world." That's Vedanta, in the sense of a meta-religion. Vedanta, in this sense, is a spiritual philosophy found within Hinduism that serves as the philosophical and spiritual foundation of all the world's religious and spiritual traditions across the board, including Hinduism. And so, the beauty of this is, you can be a Vedantic Hindu, you can be a Vedantic Christian, you can be a Vedantic Muslim, you can be a Vedantic Zoroastrian, you can be a Vedantic Buddhist, and so on and so forth. Because Vedanta is just something more fundamental than any, you can say, using philosophical language, it's a technical way of putting it, but Vedanta is a second-order meta-religion that grounds and explains all the different first-order world religions. Okay. Now, interestingly, I discuss this in detail in a book I wrote on Vivekananda called Swami Vivekananda's Vedantic Cosmopolitanism in chapters 2 and 3. You can look at that for details. I don't have time to go through them. When he teaches Vedanta, he teaches that Vedanta has 4 key doctrines. And he basically explains this is Vedanta as a meta-religion. And all 4 of these doctrines correspond to the 4 core doctrines of Hinduism. That's what's striking. Let me remind you again, what are those 4 core doctrines? This needs to be drilled into all our heads. Number 1, the ultimate reality is one. It's the infinite divine reality, which is personal in one aspect, impersonal in another aspect. It's formless in one dimension, and also assumes many different forms, and goes by many different names. That's doctrine number 1. That's also the first doctrine of Vedanta understood as the basis of all religions. Number 2, we, each of us, is intimately connected to that infinite divine reality as eternal souls, either because we're identical or in some other way we're intimately connected. We could be a child of God, we could be a servant of God, we can be a portion of God or identical with God. Third key doctrine of Vedanta as a meta-religion, the goal of life is to realize our true divine nature and realize that infinite divine. And doctrine number 4, how do we attain this goal? Through any number of spiritual practices, which we can generalize into one of the 4 yogas: Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Raja Yoga. That's it. Vedanta as a meta-religion is identical to the 4 core doctrines of Hinduism. Okay, so you can already see where I'm going with this. But then he adds one extra doctrine, a 5th doctrine, to just cap his understanding of what Vedanta as meta-religion is. And it follows directly from the 4th doctrine. It's called religious pluralism. This is the term given, a technical term used by philosophers and theologians.
Can you repeat all 4 doctrines, please?
Okay, one more time. Here we go. There is one infinite divine reality which goes by various names and which manifests in many different forms. That's number 1. Number 2, each of us is intimately connected to this infinite divine reality as eternal souls. So we're not the body-mind complex, but we're eternal souls, which are in some way intimately connected to the infinite divine reality. Number 3, the goal of life is to realize that infinite divine reality. Number 4, we attain this goal of life through the practice of any of the 4 yogas or any kind of spiritual practice, actually. That's it. Those are the 4 doctrines. Now, doctrine number 5, which completes his understanding of Vedanta as a meta-religion, is what's called religious pluralism. He does something brilliant. He says, every world religion corresponds to one or more of these 4 yogas. One or more. It doesn't mean Christianity is just Bhakti Yoga or something, or it could be multiple. And then he says, each of these 4 yogas is a direct and independent path to this highest goal of liberation. Okay? So if each of these yogas can take us to the highest goal directly, and each of the world religions corresponds to one or more of these yogas, what does that mean? It places all of different world religious traditions on an equal footing. We don't have to look down on other religions. We don't say that my religion is better than yours. It's really a matter of temperament, which religion you follow. What's your preference? What do you like? You don't have to judge other religions anymore. So that's Vedanta understood as a meta-religion in a nutshell. So now we can come back to the overarching question that this talk poses. Is Vedanta Hindu? And with all this background, I hope the answer, you can see, is a resounding yes. Why? Well, let's think about these three main senses of Vedanta. Number one, Vedanta understood as the Upanishads or as the Prasthana Traya, Upanishads plus Bhagavad Gita plus Brahma Sutra. All of those are Hindu scriptures. And so therefore Vedanta is Hindu, obviously, in that sense. Number two, Vedanta understood as one of the major traditions of Hindu philosophy. Alongside Sankhya and Yoga, that's also equally Hindu, duh. It's like asking this, is Catholicism Christian? Of course it is, because it's a tradition within Christianity. So in exactly the same way, in the first two senses of Vedanta, Vedanta is definitely a tradition within Hinduism, okay, and based on Hindu scriptures. ChatGPT, I gave a talk, last time I came here 2 weeks ago, I gave a talk called Vedanta in the Age of AI, and so I started having fun with ChatGPT. So I thought for this talk it would be fun. I asked ChatGPT, is Vedanta Hindu? And it gave a very smart and articulate answer. It's not complete. You still need me up here. Okay, here's what ChatGPT says. Yes, Vedanta is a major philosophical tradition within Hinduism. It is based on the teachings of the Upanishads, which are the concluding portions, anta, so it knows Sanskrit, of the Vedas, the oldest Hindu scriptures. Vedanta explores concepts like the nature of reality, Brahman, the self, Atman, and liberation, moksha. There are different schools of Vedanta, such as Advaita Vedanta, non-dualism, Vishishtadvaita Vedanta, qualified non-dualism, and Dvaita Vedanta, dualism, each interpreting these concepts in unique ways. While deeply rooted in Hindu thought, Vedanta has also influenced spiritual traditions beyond Hinduism. So thank you, ChatGPT, for helping me here. I think it's an accurate answer, and it's a very good start, but it's not complete. Why is it not complete? Because it misses that third, broadest, most universal understanding of Vedanta as a meta-religion. And that's what I want to focus on for the remainder of the talk. That Vedanta is equally Hindu as a meta-religion found within Hinduism, which serves as the spiritual basis for all of the world's great religious and spiritual traditions. So how is any of this relevant to us as spiritual aspirants? Let me make a case for it now. I want you to come away from this talk at least keeping in mind these three takeaway points. Number one, if you are attracted to Vedanta, if you like Vedanta, if you identify as a Vedantin, don't be shy about calling yourselves Hindu as well. Hinduism has become a bad word in certain circles, but it's our responsibility as Vedantins to teach people what Hinduism really is at its spiritual core, based on these four key doctrines, which I'll repeat one more time so that we're all on the same page. So Hinduism is not a swear word. It's not a four-letter word. And it doesn't stand for exploitation and oppression and the caste system and this and that. It stands for four things. Number one, there's one infinite divine reality, which goes by many names and which manifests in different forms, which is personal in one dimension, impersonal in another dimension. Number two, each of us, we're not the physical body, we're not even minds. We are eternal, blissful, divine souls who are intimately connected with that infinite divine reality. Number three, the goal of life is to realize our true divine nature, realize that infinite divine. And if we attain that realization, we will be free from all suffering and attain limitless fulfillment. Number four, there are many different paths to that goal, which we can generalize into one of the four yogas. And we can also mix and match the yogas, and I'll come to that in a second now. And then, as I said, Hinduism plus, if you go even more deeply into Hinduism, so if you accept those four doctrines, you're already Hindu. And then when you study Hinduism more, you read my book on karma and rebirth in Hinduism, you're like, you know what, maybe there is something to karma and rebirth. That's Hinduism plus. That's those four core doctrines plus 5 and 6. 5, the doctrines of karma and rebirth. 6, a caste system based on your innate qualities and your behavior, not based on heredity. That's Hinduism plus. You can also be a Hindu by subscribing to the 6 doctrines of Hinduism plus. Now, so what I would say is, if somebody asks you, what religion do you belong to? You say, I'm a Vedantin, which also makes me a proud, universal Hindu, who accepts all of the world's religious and spiritual traditions, and not just accepts them, but we actively learn from traditions other than our own, because we're Vedantin and because we're Hindu. And so, going into a little bit more detail here, Vedanta as a meta-religion is a universal spiritual philosophy that empowers us to carve out our own unique spiritual path. This is really important. Swami Medhananda used to say, no person is born into a religion. It's a startling statement. No person is born into a religion. Each person, he says, has a religion, an individualized, unique religion hidden in the depths of our soul. And so the first step in spiritual life is trying to discover what that unique, custom-built religion is that's unique to us. And Vedanta, as a meta-religion, empowers us to discover and practice that individualized religion within each of our hearts. So instead of looking down on other religions, or even we can say, yeah, they can follow their path, but we don't have anything to learn from them. No, we can and should actively learn from traditions other than our own. What do we learn from other traditions? We learn a whole lot about the nature of that infinite divine reality, because different spiritual traditions talk about God by different names, in different aspects, in different forms. And so the more we expose ourselves to other spiritual traditions, the broader our understanding of that infinite divine reality is. And secondly, remember what Swami Medhananda says. Every world religion corresponds to one or more of the four yogas, which means what? We can get tips about and enrich our own spiritual practice by learning about other traditions. And you'll find that each tradition has a unique strength. Swami Medhananda used to say each religion has a particular excellence. He called it their soul. And Schuon, some of you might have heard of a scholar named Fritjof Schuon. He said, every religious form is superior to the others in a particular respect. Every religious and spiritual tradition gets something right and says something in such a beautiful and powerful way that is in some sense better than the way that same idea is expressed in other religions, which doesn't mean that you should feel puffed up with pride. The idea is that there's something to learn from every religious tradition. That's the idea. Try to absorb that particular excellence from every spiritual tradition and make it part of your own home tradition. Now, this doesn't mean that your religion should be this kind of hodgepodge of different things, because that becomes a kind of mess and it's unrigorous, and we should avoid the danger of what I call lazy harmonizing, which means it's this kind of like, I accept Buddhist mindfulness and I accept all of Christianity. I also accept all of Islam. And the problem is when you do that, you end up falling into contradictions. I'll give you a simple example. I love the Buddhist practice of mindfulness, for instance. Many of you probably practice that too. It's wonderful. And that's an important part of my own spiritual practice. At the same time, it requires a little bit of tweaking for me as a Vedantin to practice that doctrine. Why? Because many forms of Buddhist mindfulness, at least, especially like Theravada Buddhism, for instance, is based on a philosophical doctrine called no self, anatta. They don't believe in an eternal self. But as Vedantins, we do believe in an eternal self. So what do? I accept the mindfulness practice taught in Buddhism, but instead of accepting the no-self doctrine, I accept the Vedantic doctrine that we're eternal Atmans, eternal selves, eternal souls separate from the body-mind complex. And then it becomes a form of what I call Vedantic mindfulness. And I've given talks on that. You can look it up on YouTube, actually, Vedantic mindfulness. So you can learn from Buddhism, but you want to make sure that you're not falling into contradictions when you absorb doctrines and practices from other religions. Make sure that everything coheres within an overarching Vedantic framework. What about Christianity? We can fully accept as Vedantins, and we can worship Christ as God. We absolutely can and should. But we cannot accept the Christian doctrine that God has only incarnated once and only as Christ. That Christ is a soul incarnation. If we do, that means we're not really Vedantins, because Gita says, Yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata abhyuttanam adharmasya tadatmanam sujamyaham. Krishna says, whenever unrighteousness increases and righteousness declines, I incarnate. I incarnate from age to age. I've incarnated many times in the past. I will incarnate many times in the future. That's the Vedantic doctrine. So you can't just blindly accept all the doctrines from other religions. You have to do it carefully and without falling into the trap of lazy harmonizing. Swami Medhananda said something really fascinating and startling about the fact that every world religion has eventually divided into many sects, S-E-C-T-S. And he talked about this phenomenon, and he put it in a very positive way. He said, the greater the number of sects, the more chance of people getting religion. In the hotel where there are all sorts of food, everyone has a chance to get his appetite satisfied. So I want sex to multiply in every country, that more people may have a chance to be spiritual. It's such a beautiful way of thinking about it. That Buddhism, for instance, just take Buddhism. Within a couple centuries of Buddha's death, it splintered into many different sects. But the idea here is for people who are attracted to the religion of Buddhism, there are even sub-temperaments within those people, right? And some people might like a form of Buddhism called Yogacara Buddhism, which sees everything as a dream. Other people are like, no, I don't like the idea of looking at the world as a dream. I still want to do the Buddhist practices, but on the basis of this world being real. So then you get a different kind of Buddhism, like Theravada, which accepts that, and so on and so forth. And that's true of every single religion. The more sects there are within a religion, the more likely it is that each of us who's attracted to that particular religion will find that perfect custom-built religion that's meant just for us. And then ultimately, the logical culmination of that is that each of us will develop a sect unto him or herself. That's the beauty of it. And part of that process is incorporating ideas and practices from other spiritual traditions. So one metaphor to make things a little bit more concrete is Legos. So think about your home spiritual tradition as a Lego structure, a certain kind of building. And each religion is a different kind of religious, like a Lego structure. One is a temple, another one is a mosque, and so on and so forth. You can take some of the Lego bricks from these other buildings and add them to your own until you build this really, each one of us is a kind of religious architect, a spiritual architect. And we build this unique, beautiful Lego structure. And another nice thing about the metaphor is that Vedanta kind of makes us kids again. And we can have fun with spiritual life. And really kind of custom building spirituality and religion for ourselves. And finally, Vedanta teaches that spiritual life cannot and should not be confined to the meditation room, to the shrine, to the few minutes that we spend meditating once or twice a day, if we do that. Sri Aurobindo used to say, all life is yoga. And Vedanta helps us to recognize that we should try to spiritualize every moment of our lives. Swami Medhananda puts that really beautifully. He says, the Vedanta is the rationale of all religions. Without the Vedanta, every religion is superstition. With it, everything becomes religion. This is a very profound aphoristic statement. Without the Vedanta, every religion is superstition. With it, everything becomes religion. Every religion is superstition. What does he mean without Vedanta? He means that if you don't understand these four key principles of Vedanta, you can get caught up in the kind of non-essentials of your own religion, in the meaningless stuff, and you end up becoming a fanatic and looking down on other religions, and you lose sight of what the essentials are, the fundamentals are. With Vedanta, a Christian can become a better Christian, a Muslim a better Muslim, a Hindu a better Hindu, and so on and so forth. And then on the other hand, with Vedanta, everything becomes religion. That's the part I want to emphasize here now. With Vedanta, everything becomes religion. It's not just about when you go to church, you're being Christian. When you go to the Hindu temple or attend a talk, then you're being a Vedantan. Or when you go to a mosque, you're a Muslim. No. In every single waking moment of your life, when you're interacting with your loved ones, when you're raising your children, when you're going to work, when you're interacting with your coworkers, when you're watching movies, when you're listening to music, every moment of your life is an opportunity to engage in spiritual practice and to spiritualize the things that we're doing. Thank you.